Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we're expecting a few more people, and I'll try to let them in as we go along and not get too distracted by that. Again, my name is Trey Daly, and I am the Public Benefits Practice Group Director at Legal Aid Chicago. On behalf of Legal Aid Chicago, I want to thank you so much for the interest that you've expressed in helping out our neighbors who are in dire need of financial assistance at this time because of the economic and health impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. Also on the call and the Zoom today are a couple of other important legal aid folks. Melissa Pachola, the director of our volunteer services unit, who many of you may have worked with before, and Dana Hunter, our VISTA public benefits volunteer coordinator. They're going to be folks that you may be interacting with as we go forward on this project. So again, thank you for joining us for this Zoom webinar training about DHS, Department of Human Services Benefits Telephonic Enrollment Assistance. Let's see. Our goal for this project is to help our struggling Cook County residents and neighbors submit applications for benefits administered by the Illinois Department of Human Services, such as Medicaid, SNAP, and cash assistance, and assure that individuals are enrolled in benefits accurately and in a timely fashion. Our agenda for today is to go over the basics of Department of Human Services benefits, to talk about the life of a DHS application, describe the referral process for this project, and then go into a deep dive on the AABD online application so you can see exactly what it looks like to assist somebody with this application. A few logistics. I have muted everybody's microphone so we don't have any background noise. We encourage you to ask questions. There will be dedicated time for questions at the end of the training, but as we go along, feel free to ask questions using the chat function. Dana will be monitoring the chat function and then letting me know if there are questions. I think I need to make sure that she is unmuted in order to do that, but we'll figure that out. Bathrooms are, well, hopefully you know where the bathrooms are where you are, and feel free to use those as you see fit. All right, so we're going to first do a quick run through of the basics of Department of Human Services benefits. These benefits, generally speaking, fall into three categories. Medicaid health coverage, SNAP, which stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, food assistance, and then cash assistance. And there's two programs, TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, and AABD Cash. And we'll get into some more detail about what each of those are. Whenever we're talking about these programs, it's important to think about a few concepts. One is categorical eligibility and another is financial eligibility. So categorical eligibility relates to the categories of people who are eligible for benefits. Certain different categories are eligible, and depending on what category you fall into, there may be different financial or other eligibility requirements for that category. The single benefit that the most Illinois residents receive is Medicaid health coverage. So there's lots of different categories of Medicaid eligibility. When the Medicaid program started in the mid-60s, it was targeted to two categories of folks: the aged, blind, and disabled, and also families with children who are receiving cash assistance. Over the years, it's expanded to include additional groups, including pregnant women. And in the 1980s, it was expanded to include special coverage for Medicare recipients. Some basic information about Medicaid is that Medicaid is not Medicare. Medicaid is a joint federal-state program that's administered by the state and funded by the combination of the federal and state governments. So in Illinois, you apply for Medicaid coverage through the Department of Human Services. That's different from Medicare. Medicare is the federal program, completely administered and funded by the federal government, that's targeted to people who are getting Social Security retirement or Social Security disability insurance benefits. One of the ways that we distinguish between these two programs is what kind of card does the person have. For Medicare coverage, folks get what's often referred to as the red, white, and blue card that looks like this. That's different than Medicaid, where in fact, you don't really necessarily get a card. When you're initially approved for Medicaid coverage, you get a piece of paper, which is treated as your medical card, and you can take that piece of paper that looks like this to any provider who participates in the Medicaid program, and that's your proof of eligibility. The way that Medicaid is structured in Illinois, as in most states now, most folks actually get their coverage through a private insurance company, through a Medicaid managed care organization. So after someone's found eligible, they ultimately will be connected to a managed care organization and ultimately get an insurance card that looks like a private insurance card. But in the short term, they'll get a piece of paper, and that's their medical card. In the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, Medicaid was further expanded with the creation of the Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP. And that allowed children who are not receiving cash assistance to get medical coverage. So it delinked the cash assistance programs for families with children and the medical program, as in part to encourage working families, to support working families by making health coverage available for their children, and to encourage families to go off of cash benefits without fear of losing medical coverage. So in the Clinton administration, we saw the CHIP program. More recently, in the Obama administration in 2010, with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, it created an option for states to expand their Medicaid programs. Illinois chose that option. So basically, any person, even if they don't have children, even if they don't have a disability, can qualify for Medicaid. This is targeted to what is sometimes referred to as able-bodied adults without dependents, or working age adults who are able to work and who don't have children. There's about 600,000 Illinoisans who have qualified for the ACA adult category since it became available in 2014. So generally speaking, some other concepts about Medicaid, the benefits of Medicaid. It's a very comprehensive program. Throughout the years, Medicaid has sometimes been referred to as offering Cadillac coverage. Generally speaking, it covers most medically necessary services. The drawback is that there are a limited number of providers who accept Medicaid. During the COVID pandemic, specifically, all testing for COVID and treatment for COVID are covered by the Medicaid program. Also, Medicaid is relaxing some of its rules about provider participation to make it easier for more providers to participate in the Medicaid program and provide care to Medicaid recipients and get paid by Medicaid. In normal times, there are some categories of Medicaid, a limited number, for which there is cost sharing associated. There are some premiums and some co-payments for some forms of Medicaid coverage. During the COVID crisis, those have been waived. So other of those limited categories that may have had to pay co-payments or premiums, those have been waived. So no one should be incurring or having to pay out-of-pocket expenses associated with Medicaid coverage. So the next significant benefit is SNAP, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This used to be called the food stamp program, often is still referred to as food stamp. So there are three main categories of people who are eligible for food stamps. One are qualified members. That's a term that's used to describe older adults over age 60 for SNAP purposes, or the blind or disabled. And generally we mean people who meet Social Security criteria for blindness or disability. The largest single chunk of people that receive SNAP benefits in Illinois are families with children. And then also able-bodied adults without dependents can receive food stamps. Under normal times, these so-called ABODs are limited to 3 months of SNAP. in order to continue receiving SNAP benefits, they have to prove that they are either working or in a work placement, work preparation program. After the Great Recession in 2008, many states received waivers of these work requirements. And those lasted until very recently. In fact, April of this year was supposed to be the first month that the work requirement was restored in Cook County, Illinois. However, because of the pandemic, that also has been waived. So for the time being, there continues to be no work requirement in place, or that's waived for able-bodied adults without dependents. The benefits of the SNAP program, for a single person, you can receive a maximum of $194 in a SNAP allotment. That SNAP allotment is made available to people via what's called the link card, an electronic benefit transfer card, much like a debit card. That's pretty much the only way that you can receive and use SNAP benefits these days. So that means you can only use them at a vendor that accepts the link card and has an electronic benefit machine where you can use your link card. There are a lot of vendors in Illinois that have the EBT system and can accept the link card. Now, there are limits on what you can use the link card SNAP benefits for. You can't use it to purchase liquor. You can't use it to purchase prepared food. So you can't use it at a restaurant, or even like at a Mariano's, you can't use it to purchase hot foods that are available at the buffet there, or that used to be available at the buffet there. You also can't use it for many other products that someone might get at a grocery store that many families need, like diapers or feminine hygiene products. You cannot use the link card, the SNAP benefits, for those kinds of things. So generally it's limited to food. Now, there are some special provisions during the COVID crisis. I mentioned that the maximum amount a person can receive, a single person, is $194. SNAP takes into account your income as well as your housing, medical, and some other expenses. During the crisis, if based on your income and other expenses, you're eligible for less than the maximum amount, you will still receive the maximum amount, at least during April and May. That may be extended. So depending on what your family size is, you'll get the maximum amount, regardless of whether based on your income and expenses, you would have otherwise received less than the maximum amount. So that's a good thing. All right, so then there's cash assistance. The two categories, generally speaking, that are eligible for cash assistance are families with children, and that benefit is called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF. It's called temporary because it's, in theory, supposed to be limited to up to 60 months. It used to be called ADC, or Aid for Dependent Children. The other cash benefit available in Illinois through the Department of Human Services is aid for aged, blind, or disabled individuals, oftentimes called AABD Cash. So the benefits available through these two programs are also paid to the link card, but unlike SNAP, you can get cash off of the link card if you receive TANF or AABD Cash benefits. The maximum TANF benefit for one parent and one child is $423 per month. So if there are more members in the family, it can be more than that. And if you have other sources of income, it may be less than that. But that's the maximum benefit for one parent and one child, $423. AABD Cash also takes into account some housing and utility expenses. So it's hard to say what the maximum benefit is, but generally speaking, people who qualify for AABD usually get around $50 a month. The purpose of the AABD benefit is to supplement SSI benefits. So it's targeted to people who are getting SSI benefits or who don't get any SSI because of other sources of income like Social Security disability or Social Security retirement benefits. While it's typically not a huge benefit, it can be an important supplement for people. Okay. So next we're going to talk about the life of an application, the process that an application follows after we help somebody complete it. So the applications generally get submitted and directed to a local Department of Human Services office. These local offices are called Family Community Resource Centers, or FCRCs. In normal times, there are many different ways to submit an application to DHS. You can do it in person at the local FCRC office. You can do it by mail. You can submit a paper application by fax. It is also possible to apply over the phone. That's the phone number 1-833-234-6343 or 833 to find help. We understand that there are significant backlogs in being able to get through on that phone line, so it may not be the best option. We're going to focus on the online application, which is available at aabe.illinois.gov, and we'll get into a lot more detail about that. So currently, most local offices are closed down because of the pandemic. While there are about 15 offices across Cook County, only 4 of them are currently open. But people are discouraged from trying to do in-person business at a local DHS office. So for that reason, in-person is not really a great option. Mail and fax are not preferable options because unless you are able to submit the application by certified mail, it's difficult to prove that the department received your application. And unfortunately, pieces of paper often get lost, misplaced, however you want to describe it, at the Department of Human Services. Similarly, faxes, which are better than mail because you have a fax confirmation sheet, our experience is that DHS often can't find a fax, so that has problems with it too. Submitting an application online is the best way to prove that you received it, that the department received it, that you've completed the application, and the department indicates its preference is to receive and process applications through its online portal. So once the application is submitted through one of these ways, it automatically gets directed to the local office that serves that particular geographic area. So each office serves specific zip codes. As we'll see later, a client has an option of choosing a different local office than the one that serves their geographical location. But once the application gets to the local office, they register it, meaning they enter it into their computer system, IES, which stands for the Integrated Eligibility System, I believe. So that's a high-tech process that the department uses to track applications and to help determine eligibility. It's a relatively new system. It's had a lot of problems in its implementation, but for the most part, it processes most applications and makes the right decision in most cases. So after the application is actually processed, again, in normal times, there are some benefits that require an interview. If you're just applying for medical coverage, an interview is not required, but for other benefits like SNAP and cash assistance, an interview is required. Normally, that would take place in person at a local office. There has always been provisions for those interviews to happen over the phone. For instance, if somebody has a disability, has a mobility impairment, transportation problems, and they can't get into an office, they could request that it be done by phone. Or if someone works during normal work hours and can't get into a DHS office because of that, they could request a telephone interview. Our understanding is that DHS is willing to entertain telephone interviews now because they are discouraging people from going into offices. And also the department has submitted requests to the federal government to waive the interview requirements for some benefits. So our hope is that the interviews can either be conducted over the phone or won't be required to determine eligibility during this time. Another thing that the local office does is verify eligibility requirements. And this is often the reason that somebody would get denied is because of difficulty in making sure the department gets all the verification information, not necessarily because the person isn't eligible. So over the years, the department has implemented policies to make it easier on the applicant to verify eligibility. One of the ways is that if you've ever received benefits from DHS before, the caseworker is supposed to refer to your old case record and use any verifications there that can still be applied. So for instance, proof of your identity, proof of your citizenship, proof that you're an Illinois resident. If you provided that once before and that's in your case record, they should rely on that now. They shouldn't ask you to prove it again. Also, more and more, the department relies on electronic databases to verify eligibility factors. So for instance, they have access electronically to information from the Social Security Administration, from the Internal Revenue Service, from Homeland Security. So in many cases, the department is able to verify income as well as citizenship status without requesting or receiving documentation from the applicant. So only when they can't find this information from third-party sources or from the case record is the department supposed to ask the applicant for verification documents. That typically happens either during the interview or by issuing what's called a verification checklist. Now, during the pandemic, the department has also relaxed some of these requirements. And at least for the Medicaid program, is accepting self-attestation of many eligibility factors. So for instance, currently, if you say what your income is on the application, if you say that you're an Illinois resident, they are going to accept that as proof of those factors. No additional proof of that will be required. So either after all the verification information is obtained or after a period of time, verification that's been requested is not received, the department makes an eligibility determination. They may find that you're eligible for one program and not the other, or that you're eligible for all, or that you're not eligible for any, or that you're eligible for one particular month and not for others. It can be a complex determination. Whatever decision they make, that is supposed to be communicated to the applicant through a written notice, a notice of decision. That notice of decision states what decisions the department has made, on which benefits, and if you are being denied, it needs to provide an explanation as to why you're being denied. So typically it might say that your income exceeds program standards or something like that. It also, the notice of decision is important because it explains your appeal rights. The fact that you do have a right to appeal any adverse action by the department or the failure of the department to make a decision. You can appeal those decisions. And this notice of decision describes how you access those appeals. Those notices of decision are supposed to be sent in writing to the applicant, but they're also electronically posted to what's called a Manage My Case account. That's a personal account, an individual, confidential, digitally protected account that we're going to talk about how you help someone create. But it's a good way to find out and keep track of the status of your application as all notices are posted to that Manage My Case account. All right. So next, I want to kind of just go over the referral process, what will happen after our training today, and you're ready, willing, and able to accept an application. A headline here is that after the training, we will be sending out emails to all of you that again will review the referral process and ask you to respond to indicate your willingness to accept referrals and how many and when you're able to accept those. But generally, this is how it will work. We will send you an email with the name and phone number of the person requesting help. It will then be your responsibility to reach out to that person. We're asking you to try at least 3 times to reach them by phone if they don't respond the first time. And if an email is provided, to also email them to try to establish contact. You'll introduce yourself to the volunteer and explain why you're calling. We provided a script, and we'll actually go over that script in a moment. But just so they know who you are and why you're contacting them. Then you'll quickly try to discern what benefits the person wants to apply for. If they say, I want to apply for Medicaid and I don't want to apply for anything else, that's what you'll apply for. If they say, I don't know what to do, our recommendation is that you apply for all the benefits that are available. But we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in just a moment. Then you'll create the online account, the Manage My Case account for the person. Then you'll actually get into the application and complete the application. Basically, completing the application, as you'll see in a little bit, is just asking the person questions, the questions that are presented online, and then entering whatever answers the person provides you. After completing the application, you'll tell the person what to expect next. And we'll go over that in the script in just a moment. Once you finish the application and your interaction with the client or the applicant, we're asking you to download the application, which you're able to do from the online portal, so that you have an electronic copy of the application. And then we want you to forward that to legal aid. You'll also call legal aid, and we'll provide that number, to provide the Manage My Case access information. So as you'll see in a little bit, that includes a user ID, a password, and answers to security questions. We'll also need to be mailing the applicant certain information. We want to mail them a copy of the application, their Manage My Case access information so they can access the online account later on if they want to, as well as some other forms that need to be filled out so that they can be a legal aid client, and so we can communicate with the Department of Human Services about their case. One of the challenges that Legal Aid Chicago is having during this time is our outgoing mail. Our office is closed. We have very limited staff in the office. So afterwards, we'll be asking you about your capacity to send out mail. It might be more efficient than ours, but otherwise we'll take care of that. Then we're asking you to stay in contact with the person you help apply if you're able to. Specifically, we're asking you to check every 15 days on the status of the application. So you would check on the status by going to the Manage My Case account if one is created, and you can see if the department has made a decision, and or contacting the client by phone again or email to ask them if they've received a decision on their case. So we're asking you to do that every 15 days so we can stay on top of the application. Generally speaking, the department is required to make a decision by federal and state law on all of these benefits within 45 days. So we're also asking you to let legal aid know if no decision has been made in the case at the 45-day mark. And then we can discuss whether there's some other action that can be taken, some additional advocacy with the department, or actually filing an appeal on the inaction or the delay of the department. That's often, that can be an effective tool in unjamming the logjam to get a decision on a delayed application. So that's, generally speaking, the process of referrals that will go out to you. Okay, so here's the actual script, and our plan was for Dana to go over that script with you. Dana, can I hear your voice?
Yep, can you hear me?
I can, that's great.
Perfect. Okay, so as Trey said, I'm just gonna read through the script, and if any questions come up, feel free to type them in the chat. So, hi, my name is Danielle Hunter, and I'm a volunteer calling on behalf of Legal Aid Chicago. Can I please speak with insert client name? After confirming that you have reached the right person, please say that I'm going to help you complete an online application for benefits from the Department of Human Services. It takes about 30 minutes to complete the application. Is this a good time to begin the application? Before we get started with the application, let me ask you a few questions. The department offers 4 kinds of benefits: health coverage called Medicaid, food assistance called SNAP, special health coverage for people with Medicare called Medicare Savings Programs, and cash assistance, either for families with children called TANF or for people who are over 60, disabled, or blind called AABD Cash. Which of these benefits would you like to apply for? Oh.
Sorry.
That's okay. If you're not sure which benefit to apply for, we suggest applying for all four. When we begin completing your online application, we will need to provide a user ID, a password, and answer some security questions. Is it okay if we keep your user ID, password, and security questions so we can check on the status of your application after it is submitted? After we complete your application, we will send you the user ID, password, and security questions so you can go onto your account too. What user ID would you like to use? It should be something that you can remember and must be between 5 to 20 letters and numbers. If you are not sure, we suggest using your name like John Doe. If your name is already taken, you can add numbers afterwards. What password would you like to use? Your password must be a minimum of 8 characters and contain a minimum of 3 of the following: 1 capital letter, 1 lowercase, 1 special character, and 1 numeral. If you are not sure what password to use, we suggest something easy to remember, like Chicago 7. Next, we need to answer 2 security questions. The answer has to have at least 5 letters. Here are the questions. Then you can read through the questions with the client, and if they're not sure which ones to answer, we usually say suggesting these 2, the bolded ones or the red ones, and then you can put Chicago as the answer. And then next you can say, what questions do you want to answer and what are your answers? Oh, and okay, now we are ready to start the application. And then once the application is complete, you can say, your application is complete and has been submitted to the Department of Human Services. The department may contact you to ask some questions about your application or to request some verification of information on the application. When the department makes a decision about your application, they will mail you a notice of decision explaining what they decided and why they made that decision. You should get this notice in about 30 to 45 days. The notice will also explain your right to appeal the decision if you disagree with it. I will be forwarding a copy of your application to Legal Aid Chicago. Someone will contact you about whether Legal Aid Chicago can provide more help to make sure you get the benefits for which you are eligible. Do you have any questions? Stay safe, and I hope you receive the benefits we applied for.
Okay, thank you, Dana.
And Trey,
Yes.
we have a few follow-up questions. So the first is the script also available in Spanish?
Yes, the script will be available in Spanish.
Okay, perfect. And then the second question is, what if they don't want you to have their password and user ID?
Then we don't keep the password and user ID. We'll respect the client's wishes. I will tell you, it's a lot easier to figure out what's going on in the case and help the person. Most clients that we work with are willing to share that information, but if they don't want to, that's fine. That just means we have to use other ways to follow up on the status of the application, including asking the client whether they received a notice or contacting the department on their behalf.
And then a follow-up question is, can we disclose that we are attorneys?
Sure. You can disclose that you're an attorney. You can choose not to disclose that you're an attorney. I will say something at this point about confidentiality and also about the attorney-client relationship. So in terms of confidentiality, we do not consider you to have a attorney-client relationship with the applicant when you are completing that application. However, as a volunteer with Legal Aid Chicago, we will be asking you to complete an agreement in which you are protecting the confidentiality of the information that you are receiving from the applicant. The individual is not considered to be a client of legal aid until after you have created the application and shared that with legal aid, and we do a formal eligibility determination about their status as a legal aid client. That also includes doing a conflicts check. So that may have been more information than was intended by that question, but you're free to tell them you're an attorney or not to tell them you're an attorney. We do ask you to protect the confidentiality of the information that they provide you, even though it may not be a formal attorney-client relationship.
And then another question is, are they online at the same time as we are?
So no, um, so two people can't be online and submitting an application at the same time. In general, our anticipation is that you will be looking at the application on the screen, and as we'll see in a minute exactly what you're seeing. You'll be reading the questions to the person who you're talking to on the phone, and then you'll enter in the answers that they provide. Now, if you want to use some other forms of technology, like Zoom or something else, where you can share your screen and the client has access to a laptop and internet, you're free to do that. We're not requiring you to do that, recommending you do that, but that's a way that the client can actually see what's on the screen. But generally speaking, you're going to be sort of driving the bus. You're going to be seeing the application on your computer screen and entering the information that the applicant provides you.
One more, can paralegals and legal professionals other than attorneys conduct the phone call without an attorney?
So there's nothing in the law that requires that a person be an attorney to provide this kind of enrollment assistance. Legal Aid Chicago has a long-standing project funded by the city of Chicago where we have paralegals who actually provide this type of enrollment assistance. But as far as the Department of Human Services is concerned, or any of the laws related to these particular benefits, anybody can help you with the application process. It doesn't have to be an attorney or someone with any other types of professional credentials.
Okay, I think that's all for now, but I will interrupt you if any more come up.
Great. Okay, so now we're looking at what you see when you go to the actual application portal, the AABE portal as it's sometimes referred to, AABE standing for Application for Benefits Eligibility, and a nice iconic reference to Illinois' own Abraham Lincoln. So you're presented with this page, Welcome to AABE, Helping People in Illinois Lead Healthy and Independent Lives. I want to note up in the right-hand corner that there is a Spanish version of the application, online application. So you would just click Español there, and it would convert the entire process into Spanish. So what we're doing when you have the initial interaction with the client is applying for benefits. Later on, you might see this entry page and click on Manage My Case to check on the status of the case. But right now, we're beginning the process and clicking on Apply for Benefits. All right, then you'll be presented with some options. The first time, you're going to select Start a New Application for Healthcare Coverage, SNAP Cash Assistance, and/or Medicare Savings Programs. As it says there, it will take approximately 30 minutes to fill out the application. A couple of important things to note here on this page. So towards the bottom of the page, you see an Exit button and a Next button. What's important about the Next button is that you have to use the Next or Back buttons to move back and forth as you navigate through the application online. You can't use your computers back and forth or you'll get a mean message from AABE telling you to stop doing that. So that's one point here. The other point here is that you'll also see there's an option that says keep working on an application that you've already started. So as you go through each page of the application, it essentially saves it for you. And so if for some reason you get knocked off because of the internet connection, or the client has some reason that they can't continue at that moment with the application, or you have some reason that you have to stop before the application is actually submitted, you can come back to the application, which has all been saved, and start where you left off or go back and change factors. So that's important to know that if for whatever reason you can't get it all done at once, that's okay. You can come back later. So we'll click Start a New Application and Next.
Trey, we have a question.
Yes.
So on average, how many referrals will a volunteer receive per week?
Okay, we don't know for sure yet. Excuse me. what it's going to depend upon is the need and to the extent that people know about this service being available for Legal Aid Chicago. When Legal Aid Chicago went to a remote work situation, we created what we're calling a Public Benefits Outreach and Enrollment Hotline. Previously, that's only been advertised through the city of Chicago, with whom we had this project. And so that's creating a certain flow of requests that are mostly being handled by our internal staff. But as we anticipate advertising that phone number more broadly, we expect the need to increase, as well as the need, generally speaking, in the community. If you're able to do one a week, that's great. We may not have one a week for every volunteer to do. And as we follow up with you, we'll get into more detail about your capacity in terms of how many folks you can help and when you can help them. But it's a little hard for us to project right now what the volume will be. Other questions?
Nope,
Okay.
we're good.
All right. So in theory, it is possible to complete the online application without creating an account that you can go back to. But for a variety of reasons, one, because you might not finish it all at once, and because we want to be able to check on the status of the application later, we do want to create an account if the applicant is willing to do so. So here you would click on create an account and then next. So as we went over in the script, here's where you're being asked to provide information related to the account. So first you put in the individual's name. Then in the second part, you create a user ID for them and a password, and you have to enter that password twice to assure that it's you've entered the correct password. In the bottom of that page, you're presented with the security questions. You have to answer 2 questions. There's the pull-down menu that has all of those questions that we listed to you before. While trying to protect digital privacy and confidentiality, we want to balance that with making these answers, user ID, password, and security answers, as simple as possible for the client to remember. But we will be providing them with these access information in writing later on, so they don't have to remember it, but you know, from doing online work, sometimes the simpler is better. All right, so once you've done that, if you've created a successful account with the user ID and password, it will tell you, congratulations, you've created an account. Then you have to, in a sense, go back to the beginning and log into the AABD system. So you'll click on that link, log into the AABD system. And then you'll get presented with this. You'll enter the user ID, the password that you developed with the applicant, and then click login. It asks you to indicate whether it's a private computer or a public computer. If you're using your computer or your work computer, please put private computer. Actually, I think it may not allow you to move forward if you put public computer. So click on this is a private computer and next. And then again, we're starting a new application as opposed to checking the status.
Okay, we have another question.
Yes.
So do you need to read that warning to them?
This warning. So it doesn't hurt to read that. I'm not going to tell you that you absolutely have to. I don't think our practice is to necessarily read that to folks, but it certainly doesn't hurt to do that. And there will be some additional places as we go through where, for instance, rights and responsibilities or other information is being conveyed to somebody, and they're not necessarily, the screen isn't asking for information. So as a general rule, it is best to read those messages to the applicant. Okay. All right, so here's an example. So before you actually get presented with questions and answers, this is information for the applicant. So it may be a little awkward or time consuming, but best practice is probably to go through and read this verbatim to the caller. It describes their rights and responsibilities related to this application, that they can provide a paper application as an alternative. The section about what if I need food right away relates to the fact that there is such a thing as expedited SNAP benefits that are supposed to be made available to eligible people within 5 days of the application. And so that describes some of the criteria for expedited SNAP. And then it kind of lists what types of information the person needs to fill out the application. All right. So then it'll ask you who is filling out the application. And there's some choices here. You can either say that the client is filling it out themselves, and that's okay to say because you're just basically typing it in for them. Or there is an option of saying that you're an approved representative. And when you choose approved representative, a benefit of that is that you would get copied on notices that are sent to the client. So it's a way for us to make sure we're staying on top of an application in addition to the other ways that we have of like going back and checking, manage my case, or contacting the client. You're not required to identify yourself as an approved representative, but it is an option. There's nothing sort of bad that happens to you if you choose that you're an approved representative. There's a possibility that you may continue to get copies of notices in the future, even after the application is approved. And those are copies. The notice is also always being sent to the client. If you choose to indicate that you're the approved representative, then it will ask for your contact information in addition to the client's or the applicant's information, which is provided later. Then there's also a place where the applicant approves you as the approved or authorized representative. And that happens by essentially providing 2 electronic signatures. The applicant's electronic signature, where basically you are typing in their name, and with their consent, you're checking that box that says that they're electronically signing the form. And then you as the representative also type in your name and check the box saying that you are signing as the approved representative.
And Trey, we have a few questions about that.
Yes.
So the first is, do we have to get permission to identify ourselves as an approved rep if the client doesn't want us to get notices?
Yes. So you should only be the approved rep if the client consents to that. And you're specifically addressing that consent question on this screen where you have to enter the client's electronic signature.
And then secondly, what does approved mean? Who has approved me?
So approved means that you are approved by the applicant, not by anybody else. It's a term of art meaning that the client has approved you to receive information from the Department of Human Services that otherwise would be considered confidential. Other questions? Okay, moving forward. All right, so here is where you're presented with some choices. So a little context. There's a state law that says whenever you submit an application to the Department of Human Services, the department is obligated to evaluate your eligibility for all benefits unless you specifically decline a benefit in writing. Our experience is the department doesn't always do that. That in fact, the process is sort of skewed in the opposite way, meaning that it's skewed so that you have to specifically ask for a benefit or the department will not evaluate your eligibility for it. The department breaks out the benefits into 4 buckets that you see here: SNAP, food stamps, healthcare coverage or Medicaid, cash assistance, and then a special separate bucket for Medicare savings programs. And that's actually a Medicaid program that helps Medicare beneficiaries pay some of their costs. While we don't feel like this process is consistent with the law because you're not declining any of these benefits, you're being forced to specifically choose these benefits. That's what we have. So we don't want you to have the burden of a very sophisticated knowledge of all of these benefits, or advising clients on whether or not they should apply for any one or all of them. So our recommendation is that the default is that you select all of them. Now, if the client tells you they don't have Medicare and they don't want to apply for Medicare savings, that's fine not to click that. If for some reason the client has some independent knowledge about the benefits and has an opinion that they express to you, I just want SNAP, I don't want anything else, just check SNAP. But if the client isn't sure, and we, as I said, recommend defaulting to selecting all. What is the significance of that? Well, it has significance for the actual application process. This electronic application is what's sometimes referred to as a dynamic application, meaning that the way you answer any one question determines what other questions you may be presented with. So the simplest benefit to assess eligibility for is healthcare coverage. So if you just clicked healthcare coverage, you'd have the fewest questions presented to you to answer. And so for every additional benefit, there may be more questions. That's one significance, is sort of how long the application takes or how many questions there are on the application. Another significance is, as I mentioned before, some benefits require an interview. So SNAP and cash assistance require an interview. Healthcare coverage and Medicare savings programs don't require an interview. So if you default to asking for benefits for all of them, under normal processing, client would be asked to complete an interview. The department is required to not delay determining eligibility for the benefits that don't require an interview. And if the client doesn't complete the interview, that just means they get denied for the benefits that require an interview, but they should be still found eligible for the benefits that don't require an interview. One thing to note is that under healthcare coverage, you see that there's a question: if you have paid unpaid medical bills for any of these months, check the boxes to apply for help paying them. This is significant because for just healthcare coverage, there is the potential of retroactive eligibility. So it's possible that you can be found eligible for up to 3 months prior to the month that you're applying. But you would only need that retroactive coverage if you had medical bills that were incurred during those months. So just answer the question: does the person have medical bills in any of the previous months that are presented? I copied this in March, so that's why it says February, January, December. If you went online today, it would say March, February, January. Okay.
Carrie, we have a question.
Yes.
So could it be possible that someone has already gotten some of the benefits but want to add a new one?
That definitely is possible. And there's more than one option to accomplish that goal. One option, the one that we're looking at, is to just submit a new application. And that's going to be the default that we recommend that you use. If somebody is already getting benefits and they have a Manage My Case account, there are alternative ways of requesting additional benefits through Manage My Case. We're not going to go through that today. We're not going to ask you to understand or know when to choose that option. It's okay to just submit a new application. Any other questions on this page?
Nope.
Great. Okay, so now we're getting into the actual application. You'll see on the left that it sort of tracks the different sections of the application and tells you what your progress is in completing it. So the first question: how many people live with you? Include yourself. So there's a drop-down menu that allows you to put the number of people. It also says, if applying for medical assistance, also include everyone that will be claimed on your tax return, even if they don't live with you. So the significance of this is for healthcare coverage for Medicaid, for some forms of Medicaid, it's heavily reliant on your tax status and your taxable income, oftentimes referred to as modified adjusted gross income, or MAGI. About half of the Medicaid programs rely on MAGI to evaluate eligibility. That means how they count your income and who they consider to be in your household. And so it's possible that you may have, say, a dependent child who doesn't live with you, and you can apply for health coverage for them. And also, because most of these benefits are based on income and family size or household size or unit size, somebody who doesn't live with you can also help to determine the number of people in your unit. So you would either answer this question as to the number of people who actually live physically in your home, but also if there are other people that you claim as dependents on your tax return that don't live with you, you can include them too. There is some sophistication and discretion in how you might answer this depending on how different programs count people. We're not asking you to understand all of those sophisticated decision points. Just answer the question as it's presented. Ask the person how many people live with you and answer that.
And Trey, we have another question.
Yes.
So are there any immigration consequences to applying for these benefits?
All right. So there is a concept known as public charge, where there is the possibility that the fact that someone received certain types of benefits may have an impact on their later application for or their attempt to become a citizen. Unfortunately, in the context of this training and the context of this project, we're not able to go into very much detail about the relevance of public charge. If you are presented with a caller who is a non-citizen and you want to consult with us later on with more detail about that, we can go over that. It's a limited number of people who, well, let me say it another way. There are a subset of non-citizens who can qualify for benefits, who can enroll in benefits, and it has no adverse impact on their citizenship status or their future attempts to become citizens. So there's a much longer answer to that question, but for purposes of this project and this training, the short answer is don't worry about the impact on citizenship. Okay. All right, so again, you'll be presented with this page. We're almost ready to start. There's just a few more things that we want you to know. So it indicates that you have a right to submit your application right away by providing only your name, address, and signature, but by filling out as many pages as possible. You may avoid delays in processing of your application. So the point of this is hearkening back to the law, which says, when we were in the context of paper applications, that an individual should not be discouraged from applying. And that explicitly means that all you have to do to apply is submit a signed application. You don't have to provide any more information for your application to be submitted. Now, for your eligibility to be determined, you may need to provide more information. And the more information that we provide on this electronic application, the better in terms of the department's ability to assess eligibility. But the reason why this paragraph is here is hearkening back to the fact that the law says all you have to do is submit a signed application. And as you go through the electronic application, some of the questions, but most of them are not required answers. You can just not answer them and go forward. We're encouraging you to answer as many of the questions as the client is able to answer, as the applicant is able to answer. But if they just don't know the answer to a question, you can move forward. It also says the date we receive your application is your application date, which affects the date your benefits will start. If the application is filed online after close of business, such as weekends, holidays, or after 5 p.m. on business days, the date of the application is the following business day. So this is important for a few reasons. When you're applying for healthcare coverage, no matter what day of the month you apply for, your potential eligibility goes back to the first day of the month. So if I apply on April 13, they're going to evaluate my Medicaid eligibility back to April 1st. And previously we mentioned that there's the possibility of retroactive coverage for Medicaid. So if I apply on any day in April, I'm potentially eligible for all of April, as well as all of March, all of February, and all of January. But for cash assistance and for SNAP, generally you may only receive prorated benefits. So if you apply on April 13th and you're found eligible as of April 13th for SNAP, for instance, you won't receive 100% of the monthly benefit. You'll receive 13/30ths, or rather 17/30ths, the remaining days in the month, a prorated amount for that month. So that's why it's important to get an application in as soon as possible. And as it relates to Medicaid, if it's a question of applying on April 30th or May 1st, day in the new month, that can actually affect how much eligibility you receive. Okay. All right. So then you start being presented with basically demographic questions about the person applying. So you'll be asked to provide their name, their gender, their date of birth, their marital status, what's their preferred language, what county do they live in, and then their actual address. You'll note on the bottom of that screen, there's a checkbox that says, I am homeless right now. If you are homeless, fill out a mailing address instead of this address. So the point is that you can still qualify if you are homeless. You don't have to present or have a actual living address, but you should provide a mailing address. In the past, the department has offered to homeless people that they could list the local DHS office as their mailing address. But given the lack of physical access, we don't recommend doing that. The best option is if the homeless person has a family member, a friend who's willing to receive mail for them, that you put that address down. So here you see the separate box for mailing address. There's the capacity to provide lots of different ways for contact: home phone number, work phone number, cell phone number, email address. This page asks what's the best phone to reach you if there's a preference among different phone numbers. What's the best time of day to call you? It asks you if you are deaf, and so there are specific telecommunication options for people who are deaf. Then once again, it asks you to select the program that you're applying for. This is at least the second time that it asked that question. Back to my answer before, the default position, if the client doesn't express an opinion, choose all four. But if they express an opinion about specific benefits, just click those benefits. Then it asks if the person is planning to file taxes this year. That technically, I believe, means that you are filing a tax return in 2021 for 2020. But it's okay to answer, I don't know. If the person either hasn't filed this year, it doesn't know if they're going to file next year. It's okay to say, I don't know. Okay. Then it asks for a social security number. You don't have to, if a person doesn't have a social security number, just don't put something down. Don't put a false social security number down. There is a limited number of benefits for which people can qualify for if they don't have a social security number. And so mostly we're talking about non-citizens here. So it's okay if you don't have a social security number. But if there is a social security number, at some point, the individual is going to have to provide that number in order to receive the benefits. Then along demographic lines, it asks for the ethnicity of the applicant and their race. These are optional questions. The person doesn't have to answer them. Then there's a residence question that's asking about what type of place you live in. This is trying to get at whether you live in an institutional setting or in a community setting, as that may affect your eligibility for some benefits. There's a drop-down menu. You just select the one that makes the most sense. Okay. There are multiple purposes for this application. The main purpose that we're concerned about is getting people SNAP medical coverage, cash assistance from the Department of Human Services. But these applications are also used for screening to assess eligibility for some other benefits. So there's a question about, does anyone have a disability or blindness determined by the Social Security Administration or disabling condition that has lasted at least 12 months and prevent the person from working. So that's important because that affects what category of eligibility you may fall into, but it also may lead to some information about the State Department of Rehabilitation Services, which are available for blind and disabled people. Then it also asks, has anyone applied for or received services through the Department on Aging's Community Care Program? That may impact your eligibility for Medicaid. That's why they asked that question. Out-of-state SNAP, food stamp benefits. Is anyone getting SNAP this month from another state? Well, this is getting at an obvious issue, which is if you're getting SNAP from another state, you're not allowed to receive SNAP in Illinois. If somebody were to answer yes to this question, it might be a good idea to pause the application at that point and check in with legal aid about how to go forward. It could be problematic for the person to be attempting to receive benefits from 2 different states at the same time. The last question on this page is related to drug felonies. So for most benefits, the fact that you have a drug felony doesn't impact your eligibility, but for some it may. So ask and answer the question accurately. Has anyone been convicted of a drug-related felony or been in violation of parole or probation? Okay, so the significance of this page is that you're seeing a summary here. And so at most of these different sections, people, liquid resources, other resources, job income, etc., it will provide you a summary before you go on to the next section. I'm not going to show you all of the summaries, but here's an example of one. So it's an opportunity to check and make sure that the information is accurate. You can edit it, you can change it if need be. Also, here's an opportunity where you would add other people in the household. When you click on add person, you'll be presented with the same questions that you were just presented with for the first person. And you go through that for all of the people that are in the household.
Hi, Trey, a few questions.
Yes.
So should we ask at the outset if they are receiving benefits from another state and instead of waiting near the end?
That's a good idea. Yes.
And then, so regarding the question asking about anyone, presume that means that anyone in the household that might be a beneficiary of some of the benefits?
Sounds like we're talking about specifically the drug felonies question. Actually, I think the precise answer is that you just need to answer that question for the person that you're evaluating at that moment. I know it's not the best, as we'll see with some of these questions, they're not maybe written as well as they might be written or as precisely as they might be written. But consider that question to be just about the person that you're evaluating at that moment. Okay. Other questions?
Nope, that answered them.
Great. Okay. So next we're seeing something that pops up that it's related to identity verification. So as part of submitting the application online and creating this online account, the system attempts to verify the identity of the person who's creating the account. And they do this by relying on credit reporting history. The Department of Human Services has a contract with Experian, the credit reporting agency. And so this information is populated by Experian. So you will be presented with 4 questions, common credit reporting questions. So for instance here, you may have opened an auto loan in or around June 2019. Please select the lender of this account. So you check the correct answer. Note that one of the answers is none of the above. And very often that is the right answer. So I have seen many of these where there's only one of the 4 questions requires an answer other than none of the above. And that's usually question number 2. Please select the county for the address you provided. So in this case, it's Cook County. Then another question that we can see here is, according to our records, you previously lived on Victory, the name of the street. Please choose the city from the following list where the street is located. Again, very commonly, the only question that has an answer other than none of the above is the county for the address you provided. Common sort of default questions are, what high school did you graduate from? And almost always that answer is none of the above. Another common question is, what is your cell phone number? And almost always the answer to that is none of the above. So just in working with the client, answer them correctly, but I'm just giving you forewarning that very often the right answer is none of the above. Okay. All right, so here's some information that's provided to the person completing the application about work and self-sufficiency rules. So you will only see this if you have checked off a request for cash assistance. So this explains that there, normally speaking, are requirements that people getting TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, either be working or in a work preparation program or in some kind of other kind of so-called self-sufficiency activity, like alcohol and substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, family violence counseling, medical appointments and treatment. So just read over this page with the person who is selected to pursue cash assistance. I'm just going to tell you, in the real world right now during the pandemic, the department is waiving most of these work and self-sufficiency requirements for people pursuing TANF benefits, just so you know. But if you're presented with this screen, just read through it and then move on.
Trey, we have a question about the identity verification.
Yes.
So in my experience, these identity verification tools tend to ask difficult questions and can contain errors. What do you recommend if the person is not able to answer these? Should we select verify identity later?
Sure. In my experience, helping a lot of folks through this online application process or creating a Manage My Case account, the answers tend to be, or the questions tend to be pretty simple and straightforward. And so it is not unheard of, based on the answers to the questions, to get a screen that says, we cannot verify your identity. And there is an alternative way of doing that that requires a written request. But it's best if we're successfully able to complete this identity verification in terms of being able to have an active Manage My Case account going forward. So I would say read through the questions, and if the client feels confident about the answer or the fact that the answer is none of the above, try to answer the questions. If the client truly is confused by the answers, you can click on Verify Identity later. It may limit our access to Manage My Case down the road, but for purposes of getting the application submitted, that's okay.
Also, on that same note, I've had instances where the client wasn't sure and they guessed and the answer was incorrect, but it allows you to go back and do it a second time. So if your client's not sure, you can always guess with them, and if it's not correct, you can just do it again. So if that's a problem, it's not either you get it, or if you don't, you're kicked out. You have multiple chances.
Good point. Okay. All right, so we're now at a point where it's asking some more questions, and this is just going to appear if you are requesting cash assistance. So it's getting at these self-sufficiency or work-related issues. It's asking if anybody is in substance abuse treatment. It's asking if anybody has any transportation issues, which limits their ability to get to and from work or other job training, whether you need dependent childcare in order to work or participate in job training. Just answer them, provide the truthful answer that the client has if you're presented with these. It is also an option to just not answer them at all. Similarly, this is screening to see if the person has a disability, if they're working with anybody at rehabilitation services, whether they have healthcare coverage, whether they're, this feels like a repeat question, but is anyone in alcohol or drug treatment program? Is anyone experiencing domestic violence? Again, these are purposes of screening to determine if folks might qualify for an alternative self-sufficiency program rather than work if they're pursuing cash assistance. Okay, Then there's more information required about healthcare coverage. It's kind of not obvious why these questions are being asked. The reality is that if you happen to have employer-sponsored health coverage, but you're otherwise eligible for Medicaid, that doesn't result in you being denied Medicaid. One note about this is Illinois' AABD application system is also linked to the federal healthcare marketplace, Obamacare, in other words. If for some reason you are denied Medicaid by the state of Illinois through this online application process, that information is forwarded to the health insurance marketplace, which the purpose of the health insurance marketplace is to figure out if you can purchase private insurance and qualify for financial assistance to pay for that private insurance. And the main point of this screen is to capture some information that's really more relevant to the health insurance marketplace than it is to your Medicaid eligibility. But again, as with most of these questions, just ask the question, ask the client to answer truthfully. If they really don't know the answer to the question, you can skip it. All right, here's a summary page about those issues. Okay, so then for some benefits, there are asset limitations. For others, there are not. So for instance, for Medicaid, for most kinds of Medicaid, there aren't any limits on assets. So depending on back to which benefits you choose, you'll be presented with these sets of questions about resources. So you'll just answer the question straightforward. Depending on how you answer, you might be asked for some more information. So for instance, you'll be asked, does anyone keep cash at home rather than a savings or checking account? Does anyone have a savings account or closed or removed a name to an account in the last 5 years? Does anyone have a checking account or changed the checking account in the last 5 years? Does anyone have any other liquid resources, or did they give away the resources? So why these questions about changes or giving away things in the last 5 years? That has very specific application to folks who need Medicaid coverage for long-term care, which has some rules that limit eligibility based on transfers of assets.
And Trey, who is anyone on this page?
So I'll say the same thing as we said related to the question about felonies. Consider anyone to just be the person you're asking about. So we're only seeing screens that were triggered by an application for one person. If you are submitting an application and you entered information about more than one person, this question would be presented for each one of those people. Okay. All right, here's a summary page on liquid resources. Then here's an example of where you might be asked for some more specific questions. So if you had said that somebody has a savings account, they'll ask you what the balance of that savings account is. And again, there's a question that says it's limited for persons who live in nursing home facilities or supportive living facility, or who intend to move into such facilities. Have you transferred resources in the last 60 months? All right, so then it may ask about other resources like vehicles, real estate, burial resources. So just ask the question and answer how the client answers. If they don't know, again, you can skip these answers, but better to provide as much information as possible. It'll ask about life insurance or additional resources, and again, asking a question about selling or giving away resources recently. So if you checked yes, somebody does have a vehicle, here's an example where they'll go into more detail. They'll ask you specifically what kind of vehicle. And if you said a car, they'll ask you for more detail about the car, the year, make, and model. You're allowed, the question is not, are you allowed to have a new car versus an old car? This is providing some information for the department to sort of automatically assess the value of the vehicle. So they have access to electronic databases like Kelly's Blue Book that provides them a objective estimate of the value of the car. They're also going to ask you what you think is the fair market value of the car. And for some resources, if you owe something on the resource, that matters. For others, it doesn't. In the case of a car, they're asking you how much you owe on the car. They'll ask you if somebody else is a co-owner of the vehicle. And then they'll ask you if you have other cars, and you'll be presented with the same question for those other cars. All right, they'll ask, yes.
One last question. Is there a checklist of documents that we should ask the client to have on hand before beginning to create the application? So for example, bank account balances, anything like that?
So not right now, but that's a great idea. And I think we'll add that in the information that we provide to you. In the way that we advertise the phone number that people call to ask for help, there is a list of the documents there that people need to complete the application process. But that's a good idea. We'll add that to help you make your time with the applicant more efficient. Okay, here's a question about burial resources. The reason that's here is that some types of burial resources don't count for benefits. So it's asking you for some detail about what kind of burial resources you have. A burial space or plot, other burial funds or contracts, a pre-need, prepaid burial fund or contract, other burial resources. This is getting to some complexity or sophistication. It's okay if the person doesn't know the answer to just move on. Similarly, some question about details about life insurance. Is it annuity, term, whole? Hopefully a person who has life insurance knows the answer to this question, but if for some reason they don't, it's okay to move on. DHS may ask for more detail about that later, but for purposes, our main purpose is to get the application in, you can move on. Here's some more types of information that it would ask about life insurance: the face value, the cash surrender value, the policy number, the insurance company from whom you purchased the policy. All right, then we're getting into income. And so it wants to know about your earned income and your unearned income. So for earned income, it's going to ask about jobs. To check the box if the person has a job right now or had a job in the last 3 months or is on strike from a job right now. There's a separate box for if the person is self-employed. It's important because self-employment income is counted differently than employment income. There's a question about refusal to work. Some, but not all of the benefits are affected by a person's refusal to take a job or accept a job. I'll just try to help the person to answer that question as accurately as possible. The question is, please check the box for anyone who has quit a job, reduced work hours to less than 30 hours per week, or refused to take a job in the last 60 days. So if you say you have a job, then it's going to ask for information about your employer. That's to address the possibility that they may have to reach out to the employer to confirm income if they can't document it some other way. And it asks some questions about how much you're paid, how often you're paid. Are you paid by the hour? Do you get any kind of bonuses, commissions, or tips? Some questions about whether you're on strike, whether you've ended a job recently. And then if you have other jobs and you say yes, it'll ask the same questions about each one of those jobs. Then it wants to know about unearned income or income from other sources. So it'll specifically ask if you have supplemental security income or retirement, survivor, and disability insurance. That's basically other Social Security income. Whether you get money for renting a room or providing meals to someone that lives with you. That's a very rare situation. Do you receive adoption or an adoption subsidy payment? Do you have any other types of income that are not addressed by those questions? So if you happen to answer yes to any of those questions, it may ask you some more specific questions about those. Your housing and utility expenses are important for determining SNAP and some forms of cash assistance. So there's questions about that. Does anyone pay bills for housing like rent, mortgage, property taxes, insurance, or temporary housing? Then it asks about utility bills, and some of the answers here are not, or the questions are not obvious about why they're being, or the relevance of the answer may not be obvious, but it's asked, does anyone pay utility bills like gas, electricity, water, sewer, telephone? Did anyone receive a payment of $21 or more this month or in any of the last 12 months in low-income home energy assistance, or LIHEAP? Curiously, if you qualified for LIHEAP in the last year, you'll qualify for a higher utility credit for SNAP food stamp purposes. Is the household billed separately from rent or mortgage for heat or air conditioning? You get a higher credit for SNAP if you pay for heat or air conditioning. But just to clarify, if you have electric heat and you're paying for electricity, that means you're paying separately or billed separately from your rent or mortgage for heat. Similarly, if you have a room air conditioner, and even if you only use it in the summer, if you use it at all and it's operated by electricity and you pay for the electricity, then you can say, yes, you are billed separately from rent or mortgage for heat or air conditioning. Some people get charged by their landlord, say in the summer, because they're using air conditioning. So if that's the case, that's an example of excess cost for heat or air conditioning. You check yes. A rare question, a rare situation, but rooms and meals. Does anyone pay to stay in a room in someone else's house or get meals as part of their rent? That's a unique situation that may impact your eligibility for food stamps or SNAP.
Trey, a quick question about the employment.
Yes.
So how do you answer work questions if you've been furloughed or laid off?
Okay, so if you've been furloughed or laid off, you are not currently working. You do not currently have a job. So you can answer the question, so the way the question, so let's be specific about the way that the question is written. Check the box for anyone who has a job right now or had a job in the last 3 months. So if you were furloughed or laid off or lost your job for any reason, including COVID, in March, February, or January, the last 3 months, you would say, you would check the box for you. There are other questions that may ask if you no longer have a job that you had in the last 3 months. And if you are furloughed or laid off, you could say, I don't currently have that job anymore. There's a question, let's see, we may not see that. So yes, on this page, job end, there's a question, is the job ended? So previously you're saying, I had a job in the last 3 months, but if you are now actually not working, you've been furloughed, you've been laid off, you would say, yes, the job ended or is going to end. If you said yes, it'll ask some additional questions about when it ended. Okay. All right, so moving forward, it asks for more specific questions about what kind of housing expense you have, rent, mortgage, etc. And then depending on how you answer that, it'll ask for the details about that. So for instance here, if you check rent, it'll ask how much your rent is, how frequently you pay the rent. Similarly, it'll ask about all sorts of different kinds of utility bills, check any that are relevant, and then it'll ask for some detail about how much and how often you pay. This page is kind of for a variety of reasons, but it's asking if you pay any child support, which can be deducted from income for evaluating some benefits. Similarly, spousal support, whether you have any ongoing medical bills, whether you qualify for Medicare Part A or B. Typically, you have to pay a premium for that, or whether you have to pay any job expenses if you're employed and blind or disabled or elderly over 65 and you have job expenses. There are some special deductions from income for that limited category of people, the age blind or disabled who have job expenses. Then there's a general question about if you have other expenses that can be deducted from a federal tax return. If the applicant doesn't know that answer to that question, you can skip it. Then depending on if you said yes to any one of those, it may ask for more specific details. So for here, spousal support was clicked yes. It'll ask how much you pay, when you're paying. Do you expect it to end soon? So that's that. Okay, so there are some other questions about expenses. There's a drop-down box that includes things like student loan interest, educational expenses. For some, but not all of the benefits, there are some additional deductions from income, and this helps you to capture that. All right, I mentioned the connection between the AABE application and the health insurance marketplace. This page is specifically related to that. Just answer the questions. If the person knows the answer, please select all the individuals in your household who can get health coverage through someone's job, or select no one if this does not apply to your household. That has no bearing on Medicaid eligibility, but it does have bearing on the health insurance marketplace. And similarly, it asks, please select all the individuals in your household who are a member of a federally recognized tribe, or select no one if this does not apply to your household. You see here, they're listing one person, Hugh. That's me in my fake application. But if we had earlier listed more people in the household, there'd be an icon showing up for each one of them. All right. So some of the benefits are affected by school enrollment. So it asks you to indicate if somebody is a full-time student, less than half-time, or not in school. It also asks you the highest grade you completed. All right, we talked about interviews. So here's a way to communicate to the department if there are limitations in your ability to participate in an in-person interview, which we don't expect are actually happening now. But you can say that you're not able to come to the interview, to the office for an interview. You can say that it's because of problems with health, or because of work conflicts, or you don't have somebody to take care of your child or a disabled adult. We recommend putting in that additional information block. I cannot come into the office because of the pandemic, or something along those lines. All right. This is a set of questions that specifically has to do with expedited SNAP benefits, or expedited SNAP food stamps. So they take into account your resources for that and your income. There are some benefits that are affected by your status as a migrant seasonal farm worker. Again, bottom line is just answer the questions accurately. If the client doesn't really know the answer to the question, it's okay to move on. All right, so we're getting to the end of the application. Here's some more material that you should probably read to the applicant. It's explaining their rights and responsibilities again, explaining whether or not they have to come into the office. It's also explaining that their submitted application, once it's submitted, is going to be assigned to a specific local office. So in this example, it's being assigned to the Southeast FCRC located on Cottage Grove Avenue. As I mentioned, I think before, people do have, they can choose to have their application go to a different FCRC. And so you'll see on the bottom there, if you would like to be served at an alternate office, please select your office of choice from the list. And there's a drop-down box. Most people don't care. I don't know that it matters in most cases, but there is a choice. Okay, this is an important thing to read to the person, that if you intentionally provide misinformation as part of this application, that is fraud. And so people shouldn't commit fraud. That's telling them that. So you'll read that to them, and with their consent, you're checking the box, certifying that they have read this, that they understand it, and that they accept the penalty statement above. And then we're getting to the very end, the electronic attestation. So this is where the person is effectively signing the application electronically, and you're doing that for them. And so you're going to read that box to them, and then you're going to say, by checking this box and typing my name below, I'm electronically attesting to the information in the application. So caller, do you want me to check this box for you? Yes, check the box. And then type their name. And then when you hit submit, the application is submitted to the department. So next you'll see this confirmation page. This will pop up automatically, and it's important for a few reasons. One is it confirms that the application is submitted, again, tells you the local office that it's gone to. Most importantly is there is an application tracking number you see towards the middle of the page there. It's a 9-digit number, I think that's 9 digits, preceded by the letter T for tracking. In department lingo, they often refer to this as a T number. So usually applications don't get lost, but on rare occasions it does happen, even with this electronic application system. So it's important that the applicant and their helpers know what that T number is. So it's not a bad idea to write that down as soon as you see it. If for some reason cataclysm happens and you get knocked off the system, the internet goes down, that's not normally going to happen, but it's useful to write down that T number. You'll also be given an opportunity to download this application. And so we're asking you to download the application, and you'll be sending that to legal aid so we can attach, we'll have a formal record of the application, and we'll also mail that to the applicant so they have a copy of the application. All right, so this is a good time to answer any questions that have not yet been addressed. Any questions? All right, if no questions, what happens next? So shortly, we will be sending you out an evaluation that gives an opportunity for you to do a couple of things. One, to evaluate this training. We appreciate your feedback on how we can do a good job in presenting this information. But also it'll be your opportunity to indicate your readiness, your willingness, your ability to start receiving referrals. So we'll ask you if you think that you have an idea about how many applications you could help per week. And we'll ask you to indicate if there are timeframes in the next few weeks where you can or you cannot provide that assistance. So you'll get a follow-up email to this training that will include the PowerPoint link attached to it, and a link to where you can answer those evaluation questions and indicate your ability to start receiving referrals. So I'll pause one more time to see if there's any questions.
We do have one, Trey. What
Yes.
is the total time commitment per application?
Okay. So generally speaking, it takes about 30 to 60 minutes to complete an application. If it's a straightforward Medicaid application only for one person, it can be as little as 15 minutes. But for planning purposes, it's a good idea to think about 30 to 60 minutes to complete the application online. We are asking if you're able to provide some follow-up assistance to the individual, as I mentioned before, to check on the status of the application every 15 days. That takes about a half an hour, maybe an hour tops, to check on the status, to let legal aid know about it, to let the client know about it. We're asking you to do that at every 15 days, up to 45 days. So that might be another half hour to hour times 3. So that's about 1 hour for the initial application, up to maybe another 3 hours to check on the status of the application. We're up to 4 hours then. Should the application be delayed or denied, we're asking you to consider doing advocacy on behalf of the client, the applicant. That advocacy consisting of trying to contact the Department of Human Services to find out more information about the status or encourage them to make a decision, or if the person is denied, to actually represent the person in an appeal. We estimate that the process of completing that appeal, asking for it, preparing for it, participating in it, would be around 5 hours. So that's not going to come up in every application, and we understand if you're not able to do that, but we welcome your interest and ability, and we'll support you if you're interested in going that far down the process. So if you go from the actual application to sticking with the case through an appeal, our outside estimate would be up to 10 hours of assistance. But for most cases, we're talking about an hour to 5 hours. Okay, any other questions?
And just to follow up, so that 10 hours is over 2 months.
So, right, so typically it would probably be actually over 2 to 3 months. So it would be 45 days. So if it's about a delay, it would be 45 days before the application would be considered delayed. And then just the process of how you ask for an appeal and for that appeal to be scheduled, it takes about another 30 days. So sort of that worst case scenario over how many days or months or weeks, it would probably be 2 to 3 months.
And doesn't an appeal need to be done by an attorney?
So Department of Human Services law, Medicaid, SNAP, cash assistance law does not require that a person be assisted by an attorney. The person can be assisted in the appeal process by anybody that they select who's over age 18. That's really the only minimum requirement, that you're over 18. So, you know, it helps that it's a person who has some knowledge about the process or has some knowledge about advocating on behalf of other people. But you do not have to be a lawyer to quote unquote represent somebody in an appeal or to advocate on their behalf in a Department of Human Services appeal. Any other questions?
I think we may be good.
Okay, well, feel free to reach out to us. There'll be contact information in the email that we send you after this. But once again, I am so grateful to all of you for taking the time to share with us today to learn about this project and about the application process. We look forward to working with you as you help our neighbors during this very critical time of need. Please stay safe and as sane as you can. And thank you again so much for your time.